organized by the Webinar and Legal Symposium Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. This webinar series is organized by the Webinars and Legal Symposium Committee of the BSL. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the chairman of the Webinars and Legal Symposium Committee and the president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Mr. Raju Amarasuriya, attorney at law. Mr. Chatur A. Galhena, Secretary of BSL, and Mr. Pasindu Silva, Treasurer of BSL, and the conveners, co-conveners, and the members of the Webinars and Legal Symposium Committee of the BSL. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Executive Committee of the BSL for all the support and guidance. We are honored to have with us Dr. Theoni Anthony as our resource person for today. Dr. Theoni is a physician, psychologist, and integrative health specialist with over 2 decades of experience. She holds a Doctor of Medicine and has trained in the US and UK, including at Burford General Hospital, with extensive qualifications in psychology and holistic medicine. She currently works as a clinical psychologist and executive coach focusing on mental well-being and personal development. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Theoni Anthony. To moderate today's proceedings, we are pleased to have with us Attorney at Law, Ms. Mokshini Jayamana. Ms. Jayamana is an attorney at law, mediator, and author with over 17 years of experience, specializing in family and matrimonial law. She is also actively involved in the legal reform and public engagement. With a strong foundation in legal practice, she has built a reputation for a professionalism, diligence, and a meticulous approach to legal matters. Through her practice, Ms. Jaimana continues to contribute to the legal profession with competence, responsibility, and a strong sense of ethical duty. Without further ado, I invite Ms. Jaimana to commence today's proceedings. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you so much. I appreciate the warm welcome, and I'm also grateful to the Bar Association of Sri Lanka for organizing this. But I think without further ado, let's hop right into the topic under discussion. I hope you don't mind me addressing you as Dr. Theoni. Dr. Anthony, is that all right?
Absolutely fine, Mokshini.
Okay, thank you so much. It's actually a real pleasure to be able to engage with you on this discussion. It is an area which interests me vastly, immensely, owing to the fact that it involves the work that I do in the main where my practice is concerned. So my first question to you, Doctor, is quite simple. Now, this entire webinar is titled Psychology of Conflict in Family Law. So ultimately, what we hope to gain from this discussion is to be able to understand how we as litigators, as lawyers, can better serve our clients when it comes to family law disputes. One thing that we are all cognizant of is that when it comes to disputes pertaining to families, whether it be between two spouses or whether it be vis-a-vis the children of a marriage, or whether it is between two adult or multiple adult offspring and their parents, when it comes to this sort of dispute, emotions run high. And one thing I have noticed is you can't be clinical as a litigator. You can't go about it with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, because there are so many gray areas, there are so many nuances, it's so layered, these disputes. And one thing that I've noticed is emotions run high, and this makes I feel like the conflict exacerbates as a result of the emotions involved. So we as litigators would like your insight, Doctor, please, to help us understand why this is. So my first question to you is, from your perspective as a mental health professional, why do conflicts arising from the breakdown of an intimate relationship, the distancing between two close family members and such like, why does it become so emotionally intense and essentially so difficult to resolve?
Um, Thanks, Mokshini, for having me on as well. So I'm so glad that I can have this conversation. Um, it's important to understand that over the years, the dynamics within families have changed. So one of the reasons that emotions run high is that as partners, so if we take, husband, wife, right? Um, most times we have chosen our other partner, right? So at some point in life, we said, okay, you're my person, I'm going to do life with you, right? And suddenly, somewhere down the line, it can be, whether it be 6 months, whether it be, 25 years, one person has decided that they don't want to do life anymore, right? Most often, right? So if we come at it from where both people have agreed, we may have less conflict. But more often than not, you'll find that one person has initiated this process, started a conversation that says, hey, I don't want to do life anymore with you. Right. And so it's a very personal thing for the other person. Right. So what ends up happening is our thinking brain shuts off and our emotional brain kicks in. And dependent on what kind of background we come from, so our childhood, right, our attachment styles, we will react rather than respond to what is happening. So it becomes a very personalized attack on you. So there's emotions like betrayal, right? Hurt, there's grief, there's a loss of identity, right? There's the feeling of not being seen and heard, right, in the relationship, right? And so, therefore, that's why it becomes emotional, right? We're not thinking anymore rationally. We regress into what is our fight or flight, our survival mode, right? And that's where we come at. So we will either come out fighting, right? Or in some cases, you'll find that certain people may withdraw, they become very avoidant. So they'll not answer a question, they'll not respond to an email, you know. So we can have both ends of the spectrum. So that's why it is an emotional response.
Thank you. Now, the problem that poses to us as lawyers is that more often than not, when a relationship of this nature, an intimate relationship, breaks down, one of the first places they go to for help is the legal professional, right? The lawyer. Now, as lawyers, we count on our clients um, to be able to engage with us rationally, to give us instructions, to help us to understand the context and articulate clearly and intelligibly what their position is and what their desired outcome is. But more often than not, as you very correctly pointed out, and I also have noticed, is that when there are these sort of disputes, they are more often than not reacting instead of thinking, and it's more emotional. So how do we? So that is a very difficult challenge for us to navigate through. Can you help us to understand how we can help to cut through the emotions and get to the core of the issue so that we would be better able to provide our clients a solution, a viable solution?
Certainly. So I think the first place that you guys can help is in actually listening to your clients, right? So sometimes they do come, and that first session is a lot of venting, a lot of emotion, um, and sometimes we just have to listen to it, right? So very often, even in our initial therapy sessions, when we have clients who come in, that's what we do, is we allow them to express how they're feeling, and then um, acknowledge what they're feeling. So that goes a long way. So it may be a very simple, thank you so much for sharing that. That must be really difficult for you, I can imagine, right?
Mm,
So when you acknowledge, right,
mm,
that goes a long way for them to feel seen and heard. And very often, the lawyer can set the tone, right,
mm,
of just listening to what they have to say, hearing what they say, and acknowledging that. So that's the first step. The second is so when they come at things with a lot of emotional reactivity, is to allow them to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. What I'd like you to do is, can you put that in an email to me,
mm,
right? And articulate what you want, and think about what you would like, what we are doing now, to achieve 5 years down the line, 2 years down the line. How do you think that would help? So one of the things that even in therapy we encourage is writing, because writing switches on our thinking brain,
mm.
right? And so when we ask, even as a therapist, we ask for people to write. As a lawyer, you can ask to write. It helps them to then articulate, step away from the emotion, right?
Mm.
And it also, when they are being emotionally reactive, you're not sitting there and going, okay, fine, let's do this now, right? So instead, it's I hear what you're saying. Can you please, go away with this thought, put that in an email to me, right? And also think about how what you're trying to do right now is going to help you 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line. So it gets them thinking in that way. So those two are big ones that, as a lawyer, you can sort of set the tone for and help the person to manage.
Thank you, doctor. So I think for me, something that resonated was the first part of your response, in that even I have found that, sometimes as lawyers, we are very concerned about our time because we have a million other things to get
Mhm,
done. And sometimes um, it is difficult to manage a consultation with a client who is going through a matrimonial dispute or a custody related dispute, because sometimes the client also may not understand at that first consultation what the problem really is and what they are expecting from their lawyer.
mhm,
But I
mhm,
find that the longer I spend listening to them, and when you ask the right questions slowly, and I feel like with that, trust begins to evolve between the client and the lawyer. And then slowly but surely, you're able to extract the core issue. Thank
mhm,
you so much for those prompts. I hear you, I understand what you're saying, but
mhm.
I'm sorry if this is being a little too precise, but could you provide us perhaps with a few more prompts, so that I mean, we can basically be guided by that to help us to help our clients in an empathetic way, doctor, instead of approaching it, as I said at the start, like a commercial law dispute or a land dispute, but to empathize with the client, be open to them, and help them feel seen and heard. Is there anything more you can perhaps give us in terms of prompts for this purpose?
Um, yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's really nice to have this conversation with you, because therapy works sort of the same way, right? Like we're like two sides of a coin. So
Yeah.
you would come at this from obviously knowing the law and that side of things. Right? We come at this trying to understand the emotion behind this, because there is, like I said before, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of hurt. And as you very rightly pointed out, most clients don't know what they want. They've just come because sometimes they're the person initiating. Other times they are the person who's been told, I don't want to do life with you anymore. And so they're sometimes in a state of shock as well, right? So in allowing them to speak and saying, I absolutely hear what you're saying. That must have been very difficult for you, right? I tend to stay away, and this is a little bit of a therapy thing. Tend to stay away from the word but, and I always add in an and or a however, right?
Mhm.
And so, I hear you, I see you. This must have been very difficult for you. Sometimes there may be a lot of emotion that's coming out. So it's to say, look, you are in a safe space, right? Allowing them to express that emotion and asking them, would you like a few minutes to sort of compose yourself so that we can continue this conversation? And those are small things. And then you can say, however, here's what I am going to be focusing on.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you some questions that will help me to understand and maybe help you to know what it is that you would like moving forward.
Mm. Thank you. That's actually very, 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 very helpful. Thank you so much for that. And also, the your suggestion to invite the client to write it down is also a good one, because as lawyers, it also helps us to better understand, not only better understand what the issue is, but we also then have in writing what we can use, in the future should the case go to litigation. Which brings me to my next question. As personally, as a lawyer, I mean, this has happened quite by chance. I didn't choose it, but it has just so happened that family law has become a huge part of my practice. And I'm grateful for it, because I'm always given the opportunity to be a part of people's journeys and help them, even through the conflict, to heal and find solace. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I'm terribly humbled by it. But as personally, I try to help the clients see the benefit of not holding on to a particular stance, digging your heels in deep and saying, no, this is, and helping them to kind of understand the benefits of amicably resolving the issue, particularly when there are children involved. But whilst it is, I'm met with success with well, most clients, there are those who are not amenable to that kind of approach, and I think it comes from a place of hurt and resentment. They want revenge, and I feel that they they're justified in feeling that. But we as litigators, we can see, several years ahead in the future, how this is going to pan out, because we have an adversarial system. And if it ends up in court and goes to trial, it will end up with allegations being made. And this is again someone who once was very close to you, or. And if there are children involved, it would further damage the children. So my next few questions are going to be twofold. Number one is, Doctor, why? Why do this sort of disputes result in individuals, sometimes holding on to this winning over everything else, and getting, this is what I want, and holding on to that? And the follow-up to that is, how do we as lawyers navigate through that, because we have to follow our clients' instructions. We can't force our opinion on them. We will advise them once they tell us what they want, but we also know that if they follow this path, it will end up in more destruction. Can you please, from your perspective as a therapist, help us to understand this, and if you can guide us through how to navigate through such situations? I know I would be very grateful.
Yeah, so I think to understand, a lot of this comes from our childhood, right? So we may realize it, we may not realize it, right? So we are raised, both male and female dynamics, when we talk about in a very sort of heteronormative sense, we are raised with the dynamics of what is expected of a male, what is expected of a female. And so a lot of identity is built around family, right? Around marriage. Culture comes into this hugely, right? So I'm a successful individual if I have a successful marriage. I have a nice family. Everything is held together. So, um, for um, for a woman, it's about being a good wife, a good mother. So there's a lot of identity tied around that. And so when a family, when a marriage sort of drifts apart, a lot of times people are aware that obviously there's a problem, we're drifting apart, but we hope that things, most times I hear this in therapy, that this is what it is, so we get used to that and we stay there. So the moment somebody steps outside of that box and says, okay, I don't want to do this anymore, right? There is a huge loss in identity, right? There is, our ego takes a hit, right? We start becoming very self-protective because we are hurt, we are betrayed, we have been let down, we have a loss of who we are. Who am I outside this marriage? Right? How I have built my life around being with this person, till death do us part. Right? Now this person doesn't want to do life with me anymore. Right? So what does that mean for me? So there's fear that steps in, financial, right? So do I have financial security? Will I be given access to my children? Right? Will this person take my children away from me? Right? So the emotion behind all of that is there's fear, there's hurt. And so we go into, because we are, at the end of the day, our nervous system works the same way that every other mammal's nervous system works. We go into fight or flight, right? And so we go into survival. So then it becomes, everything is about, I need to win because I need to have one up on this other person, right? Because that's how I feel validated. I feel justified. I have won, right? So even though this person has maybe said, I don't want to do life with you anymore, I have won because I am going to fight every little thing, because if I don't fight it and I don't win, then I have lost, right? And already in some cases, they may feel like they have lost so much, right? And so that's where that comes in. So there's a lot about I have to win, because that's about I'm afraid of being abandoned, right? I'm afraid that I will not have financial security. I will not be a good parent. I will be viewed as a failure in society, right? So all of those things come into play, right? Um, in From the perspective of a lawyer, uh, always a good idea to say, hey, I understand that this is very difficult for you. What might help is to go and speak to somebody who will help you to manage how you are feeling. Because my responsibility is to look at how best to navigate the divorce from the legal perspective, this person may be able to help you to navigate how you feel so that you can move forward after this whole legal process is done, to move forward in life and to be in a place of contentment and find your identity again. Okay? So that's one place to direct. We come back again to what I mentioned before, which is, how do you think what you are asking for right now will help you 5 years down the line? Right? The other one is, again, can you go away and put this in writing, right? And articulate for me what it is exactly that you want, right? And how you feel this will help you, right? This will help the children, because a lot of times we get caught up in, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like what I see from my side is with the children, obviously with custody and time spent and, those sorts of things. And then on the financial side of things, right? So in saying, how do you think this is going to help you 5 years down the line? Right? Write that down for me. So a lot of times when we do write, these things come up for us. We tend to step out of that emotional brain and into what we call our thinking brain, right? And also asking them to seek that help to help navigate that.
Thank you, Doctor. That's really, really helpful. But this entire thing about, opening up the channel to kind of suggest to your client that perhaps that since they are in an emotionally volatile situation, they should perhaps seek the help of a mental health professional. I think this is all very new in Sri Lanka because there is a lot of stigma also attached to going and seeking the help of a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or whatever. So sometimes, clients might be taken aback by it, right? So I think also it is important for us to understand who we should direct our clients to. I've also had situations where clients expect that role to be fulfilled by me as their lawyer. And whilst I can't be completely cold to them and I have to be empathetic, I too, as a lawyer, need to know where to draw the line. And that is not my area of expertise. So I can't switch because then I'm doing my client a disservice. So at what point should I, as a family lawyer, gracefully suggest to my client that maybe they should seek help? And should I suggest to them what kind of mental health professional they should get the help of? And also, do you think it is important for us as lawyers also to get the help of a mental health professional, because this job can be extremely taxing and emotionally very, very strenuous and can take a great deal out of us. So 3 questions there. Sorry. Take your time, please, Doctor. We're at the halfway mark, so we have time.
Okay. So yes, there is ideally when we want to suggest getting help from a therapist is usually before problems start, right? But most times people have already, they're quite into this sort of the dynamic by the time they enter there. So usually, if you do notice with your client that they are very emotionally reactive, right? So everything is like emotionally written. You'll find that they write sort of essays in texts to their partner, to you. There are messages that come at midnight, so that's that sort of emotional reactivity that comes from a place of anxiety. if you have a sort of a all or nothing thinking, right? So it has to be this way, it can't be any other way. This is, and it's sort of also a very controlling personality, right? Of here's what I want done, and I want it done like this, and I want it done this way. So when we start noticing those sorts of patterns, it's a good idea to suggest that, to say, look, I can help guide you with the legal aspect of what it is you are asking me to do. However, I do feel that it would be beneficial for you to talk to somebody else about this, uh, because I don't have the training, and while I can listen to you, right, I don't think that I can help you emotionally move forward from this point. Right? I can help you legally move forward, but emotionally I can't help you move forward. And that may require, you going and talking to a mental health professional. Mhm. Um, so I think that's the point at which so the earlier the better, if you can guide them towards getting the help that they need. So especially sort of, I think, in the context of Sri Lanka, it's important to understand that we have sort of different categories of help that we can get. So we can go and talk to who's somebody called a befriender. They are technically not mental health professionals, but they are volunteers who have had some training in mental health, and so they can listen to you. Right? They are technically not supposed to tell you what to do. Nobody is. No mental health professional is supposed to tell you what to do. They basically just listen. The next level up is a counselor who also does pretty much the same thing, but they have that mental health training, right? Now, and when I talk about mental health training, I'm talking about, having a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and then training, right? Supervised training that has to have happened. So they will also sort of listen to you, and they may be able to give you some questions to help guide you, right? And on like, hey, you said this to me, and I think maybe you need to go away and maybe write about that and think about how you're feeling, right? The next person is a therapist, right? And we need to make sure that that therapist is also how they are trained. So what's their specialty, right? Is it marriage and family conflict, right? Do they have what's called a background in trauma training to understand how our childhood affects how we show up today? And they will be able to ask you the questions, to give you the exercises to help you move through, right? So, for example, they'll be able, when they see emotional reactivity, while they can hold space for you to put that all out, they can then say, they can give you guided questions. So to say, hey, help me understand why this bothers you so much, right? Where do you think that thought process comes to you from, right? So they can sort of help you move through that process. Right? So that's sort of from a mental health perspective. Right? I think it's really important. And I think as lawyers, it's important. As the client, it's important that we do ask the therapist the questions, right? Of what's your training been like, right? So not just what's your educational background, right? So not just that you have sort of degrees hanging on the wall, but what's your training been like, right? How often have you handled family conflict? Right? How do you think you can help me move through this process? Right? So it's important that as lawyers, you tell the clients to also be able to open up and ask those questions. Right? So from that perspective, I think that's really important. To answer your third question, personally, I think everyone should go to therapy. I'm a therapist, I go to therapy. right? Because at the end of the day, while we are professionals and we have a career, we are also human. We have other aspects to our lives, right? So we are partners, we are mothers, we are fathers, there are so many different roles that we handle, right? And each one of us has a different level of capacity. So I think it's very good for us to be able to touch base with somebody who, in a non-judgmental space, who doesn't really have any vested interest in you besides making sure that you're doing well mental health wise, to have a conversation. And and usually I say to people that's sort of like it can be a check-in session. And I have clients who come to me who do that. I do that with my therapist, which is, every 6 weeks or so, I check in with them, and they just help understand where are you in life, what's happening with you, how are you doing emotionally, are you aware of how much maybe stress you're carrying, are you aware of how you are feeling? Have you, has work become so overwhelming that you have dissociated, as in stepped away from how you're feeling? Right. So being able to catch those things, right? To be able to catch those signs of burnout, right? Which is one of the first ones that we notice is this dissociation, right? Like, okay, I got this, I have this, it's okay, I can rest later, right? So because I just have to power through. So it helps us to sort of put a pin on where are we, right? Mental health wise. So that helps. So that's why I think everyone should go for therapy.
Thank you. And of course, you're being completely impartial when you're saying that and very objective. So you mentioned three types: befriender, counselor, and therapist. And each have their grades of specialization and qualifications. Now, doctor, are these different specialists obliged to answer the question when you ask them, what is your specialization? Are you trained? Are they obliged to tell you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So it's sort of like, now I know this doesn't happen a lot in Sri Lanka, but if I was to come to you, I would say, what sort of law do you specialize in? Because if I'm coming to you with something that you don't specialize in, then it's not helpful to me.
Of course.
Right? So we do this with doctors. So in the US, for example, um, my patients will come to me and say, hey, what's your specialty? Right? How can you help me? Right? So it's sort of like you're not going to go to a diabetes specialist to look at why your joints are hurting, right? Like, so you have to know who you're going to, how they can help you. And as a professional, you are obliged to tell them, hey, this is my training. Here's my background. Here's what, the supervised training I've done. And here's my specialty.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've also had clients who have bless them, have been quite forthright and open and said, ChatGPT is my therapist. And that is also becoming a growing issue right now with AI taking over almost every aspect of professional services. Is there anything you would like to say by way of, do you think it's a good idea to resort to that any form of AI for your mental health?
So I don't think it's a good idea to rely on it solely. Because so remember, I say this to my clients and they sort of always look at me and I say, look, there are three sides to a story. There's your side, there's your partner's side, and there's the truth that sits somewhere in the middle. Right? When we go to ChatGPT and we say, my partner is A and B and C and D, I'm giving ChatGPT or any AI my view of what the problem is. And therefore, based on my view of what the problem is, ChatGPT is going to tell me, right, oh, you've said he's A and B and C and D. Okay, this is what he is. Right. And so I have clients who come to therapy and say, "Oh, ChatGPT told me that my partner is a narcissist." I'm like, okay, and so I know that it's not something that we can completely step away from because it's there
Yes.
and people are going to use it.
Yeah.
Right? It's important that in therapy that I will say, okay, tell me why you think your partner is a narcissist. And
Right.
then, pick that up from there because I don't invalidate the way my clients feel. Right. So I go to them and I say, okay, help me understand where you're coming. Right. And so we redirect. It's also important that we point out to our clients that, while social media is a wonderful thing in certain ways, right? These are like really little clips of things that we see. Right. And so there are very good therapists on there who do a lot of good work. But one of the disclaimers that we all put on there is that this is not a substitute for therapy.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't look at our content that's on there and then decide that, okay, I don't need therapy because this person has told me that this is what an avoidant looks like and this is who I am. And, so it's a great starting point to sort of go, oh, okay, this resonates with me a little bit, right? But it's always important that we then go and speak to somebody who is qualified to be able to throw back at us an impartial view, right?
Sure.
Because our story is our story, right?
Sure.
And so there's a lot of again coming back to our past, our relationships, our childhood, everything that colors how we interpret it. What we say to somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Doctor. I mean, that's so true. There's my version, there's so and so's version, and then there is the truth that sits somewhere in the middle. And I think it's important for us to be confronted also with, what is actually the objective truth, which
Yes.
might be hidden from us if we only resort to, generative AI to help us through our emotional issues. Doctor, a big piece now. I think it might take up the rest of our conversation. But before that, I would like to invite our participants, if you would like to, pose any questions to our resource person. The Q&A box is available. I won't promise you that I will be able to take on all the questions, but I will endeavor to. We only have time till 7:30, and now we're at the 7:13 mark. So yes, please feel free to jot down your questions, and the team at the BSA will help me to filter and take those questions. Doctor, so now the next big part is children. So an unfortunate side effect of these types of disputes is that the children are, caught in the crossfire. What I would like you to help us understand is how do we, I mean, it's inevitable. We're talking about the fragmentation of family unit. So obviously, the children are going to be impacted. Let's face it, that's the truth. But number one, perhaps, so from the perspective of the client is coming to meet me because the client has already made this decision or is considering making this decision. I, for one, have suggested to my clients to speak to clinical child psychologists if there are small children involved or even adolescent children involved before they make this decision, to speak to a child psychologist to help the children through the conflict. I'd like you to tell me whether that's a good idea. Only because it is obvious that the children are impacted in these types of conflict, and I would like to better understand how the client can minimize the adverse impact on the child, and how we as lawyers, given that we owe a higher duty to the court and particularly in matters concerning custody, where the district court is vested with the role of being the upper guardian of minor children, we owe a duty to the district court to ensure that the child's best interests are safeguarded. How do we as lawyers also help to minimize the impact on children caught in these types of disputes?
Yeah. So I think it's important that we understand that children don't need two parents who are married to feel safe, right? They
Okay.
need two parents who are in what we call emotionally regulated, right?
Right.
So it's
That's
the
an
marriage.
important distinction to make, but we often don't realize that it's not one and the same thing. Thank you. Yes, okay.
Exactly.
Sorry for
So
interrupting, but I thought that was really, really good. Okay, sorry, doctor, go ahead.
no, that's fine. So yeah, because we get lost in this, oh my gosh, we are married and now we're getting, we're separating or we're getting divorced and the children are going to be impacted. It's not that actually impacts the children. If we look at it from the child's perspective, right? For children, their parents, no matter what age, provide what we call their psychological safety. It's as for children at a young age, if you take child's perspective, their survival literally depends on their parents because they can't do anything for themselves, right? So when they're younger. So there's physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety. Right? As children get older, the parents are still their safe space, right? That's what they have grown up with. So they're what we call there are emotional anchors, right? They're like those two big pillars that hold us up as children, right? And when there is conflict between these two people, right? That safety is threatened. So that's where it affects the children. That's one thing, right? So what we have to understand is that the moment as parents we start bringing conflict into their presence, right, their safety is threatened. Next comes their loyalty, right? They love both their parents, right? So, and again, a proviso as long as there is no physical, emotional abuse, things like that, right? Like we're leaving that out of this conversation. They love both their parents, right? And suddenly we're seeing conflict happening, parents bringing the children into that conflict. So sometimes it's happening in front of them. The children become the mediators, right? So there's a bit of like, go and tell your dad this, or go and tell your mom this, and, dad is going to take you away from me, right? So those sorts of things then create conflict, a loyalty conflict, right? So if I listen to mom and I don't listen to dad, then, dad is going to think I don't love him, or vice versa, right? Younger children, because they don't know how to handle adult conflict, end up believing that they are the problem. So I caused the problem, right? So if I behave better, if I listen better, right? Maybe mom and dad won't fight, right? So they take on that responsibility. And the other one, which is one of the more damaging ones, is that when we bring our children into our conflict, we do what we call, which is we parentify our children. So our children feel responsible for us. They feel like they need to take care of us. They need to do things for us, right? They need to emotionally manage us. So those are the things that affect our children. And that happens when we bring them into the conflict. So they see us fighting, right? They see us talking bad about the other parent, right? They they see us accusing them sometimes of, you care about dad more, or you care about mom more, right? So the moment we start bringing them in, that's where we are adversely affecting our children. So how we manage that is that we understand that our conflict is our conflict, right? So it's a conflict within the marriage, not within the family. And that's an important distinction that we need to make. So how we can help our children is in reassuring them that mom and dad love them no matter what. So no matter whether mom and dad live together or we live separately, the fact that we love you doesn't change, right? The fact that we will always be there for you doesn't change, right? So that's an important uh, thing that we have to start those conversations. What you said, which is going and speaking to a child psychologist, of like, hey, because you may also notice changes in behavior. So one thing I've noticed with therapy, with some of the children that I know that I deal with, is that they actually know and can sense the conflict in our marriages way before we can, or way before we even acknowledge it. So they become aware of that. So it's important that we do go and get the help to notice when there is change in their behavior, change in their emotional response, change in how they're doing at school, right? Sometimes in younger children, we have what's called regressive behavior. So, for example, a child who's about 8 years old, who's not wet their bed in 4 or 5 years, they notice their parents fighting, they'll regress to bedwetting again. So when we notice those things, it's very important that we do bring in child psychologists to help to us to understand how we can navigate the situation that's in front of us.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So, two key takeaways for me from that segment, which you articulated so well, is that a child does not need two parents who are married, but the child does need parents who are emotionally regulated. And I think that we confuse the two sometimes, in that we assume that if the parents are married, that they are emotionally regulated and therefore can provide the children the safety that they require. But as you also pointed out, particularly in abusive marriages where there is an aggressor in the home, obviously there is no emotional regulation and obviously there is no safety. And that's a big one, I think. Thank you so much for that.
And sorry, Mokshini,
Yes,
just a quick one, because so there is research that says that children who stay in homes with two parents who are married but are not emotionally regulated, where there is regular conflict, right, and even abuse, end up having more adjustment issues, more behavior issues, and later on in life, more mental health issues, right? And I think it's so important that we understand this, which we all forget really easily, is that for children, their parents are their first introduction into what love is, right? What does a marriage look like? What does a healthy relationship look like, right? So they learn from us and our behavior towards each other. And so when they see dysfunction, what 9 times out of 10 happens is, as adults, they continue that dysfunction. So families that actually separate, or marriages that actually separate and have healthy, regulated adults, those children actually thrive and do better. But there's research to back that up.
Okay. So whilst this is not encouraging breakdown of a marriage, it is important to understand that merely keeping the marriage intact against all odds doesn't necessarily mean that is in the best interest of the children. That is an important distinction to make. I believe that first thing, as lawyers and as parents, that we need to consider in this sort of matrimonial dispute is, how is the child impacted by this entire thing? And
Absolutely.
you put it, the way you phrased it was, we need to keep the children out of the conflict,
Exactly.
by helping, and to help them understand that whilst the dispute is amongst the two married partners, it is not a part of the family. How do we as lawyers help to, because I mean, when the clients come to us and it's a dissolution of a marriage, and obviously when there are children involved, the question of custody comes up. How do we as lawyers help to keep the child out of the conflict according to, your experience? Are there any insights you can share with us? Because it's heartbreaking to see children going through what they do go through in these sort of situations.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the first one is, as you pointed out, redirection to a psychologist, a child psychologist, and say, I think that would be helpful for you to understand how this separation, this divorce is going to impact the children. Um, when they talk, when you talk about, or the client talks about, I want A and B and C and D, and I don't want him or her to have this, and I don't, all of that. Um, and they get very rigid in there, like, this is what I want. Um, Maybe saying to them, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I understand that this is how you feel at this moment. Help me to understand how you feel this decision that you are making will impact your child.
Mm.
Right? Um, Even saying, saying, look, can you speak to the psychologist about these decisions that you have, you are making or choosing to make at this moment, and maybe discuss that, and how that will be impacting your children in the future, now and in the future.
Okay. Thank you so much. Doctor, are there any recommendations you can make, to now, as a professional who also has seen the way things work in, in America, when it comes to, the judicial system, the justice the system of administration of justice, um, are there any recommendations you as a practitioner can make to help, um, uh, is there any way we can introduce therapeutic interventions during this process of matrimonial disputes, the adjudication of a matrimonial dispute in a court of law?
Um, so I guess looking at it from the American perspective, I think it's uh, culture needs to be taken into consideration hugely, right? And America has a no-fault divorce, right? So you can do that. Therapy is also a lot more common there. So there are people, who go for therapy. It's like you said very rightly. There's no stigma there, right? So you're going through a hard time. There are therapists. You contact them. You do that. Um, I think, um, so. One of the things that I do with my clients who come to me, either together or individually, and they say, look, hey, I've decided I don't want to work on this anymore. I'm done. I like, um, I will say to them, hey, I think you should go and have a chat with a lawyer so that you understand what are the legal ramifications of the decision you are making. Right?
Mm.
I can tell you how emotionally it's going to affect you. I can tell you how it's going to affect your family, your children. From a cultural context, we can have that conversation. But from a legal perspective, I think you should go and have that initial chat of just understanding what does all of this entail. So I think in the same way, when somebody comes to you initially and says, okay, I've decided I'm done, I want to separate, I want to file for divorce, is maybe in that context of saying, hey, I think you do need to go and talk to somebody to understand how this is going to affect you emotionally, psychologically, and how it's going to affect children, if there are children involved. So that you can understand what that entails for you. So that, because like I said, I think we play very complementary roles, so that it can help us to, that person comes and they go, oh, okay, so legally here's what's going to happen for me if I decide to walk away, and oh, okay, this is how this is affecting me, and so the decisions I'm making, the choices I'm making, this is where these emotions are coming from. So it can, we can sort of complement each other in helping that.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So that brings us to the end of our time together. Unfortunately, we can go on for much longer. I also do understand that you have a flight to take, so I won't detain you any further. I think it's serendipitous that you were actually in the country when these webinars were being held. So I'm grateful for that as well. And with that, I'm going to hand over the rest of the proceedings to our compeer, so that they can bring this to a close. Thank you once again, Doctor. It has been an absolute pleasure to be able to engage with you on this topic.
Thank you, Mokshini. I appreciate you guys having me on. Just as a side, if there are any questions that come up during this, at this time, I'm happy. You can send them to me, email them to me. I'm happy to help answer them.
Unfortunately, we don't have any in the Q&A. I did check. But yes, if there are, so that's something for our participants. If there are any questions, you can write in to the Bar Association or to me, and we will be happy to direct them to Dr. Seaman. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jayamana. This brings us to the end of episode 4 of the series 4 and the 83rd BSL webinar. My sincere thanks to our resource person, Dr. Theoni Anthony, and our moderator, Ms. Mokshini Jayamana, for an insightful session. I also thank the BSL Webinars Committee and all participants for being part of today's discussion. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.